Hello, I'm John Molesky, and this is Wilson Center Now, a production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. We have a special program today. We're going to be talking to three scholars from the Southern Voices Network for Peacebuilding here as part of a program conducted by our Africa program. You're going to hear about their projects at the center and a little about their experience while here. Let me introduce you to each of them quickly, and then we'll hear from each of them in more detail in just a moment. Joining us today is Kgalalelo Nganje. She is an elections officer for the Independent Electoral Commission in Botswana, and she holds a Master of Arts degree in politics from the University of Johannesburg. Also with us, Adane Tadesse. Adane is a lecturer, researcher, and PhD candidate at Addis Ababa University in Ethiopia. He holds a Master of Arts degree in international relations. Our third guest is Marie Grace Kagoyire Gasinzigwa, and she is a PhD candidate at in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences under the Chair for Historical Trauma and Transformation at Stellenbosch University. She holds a Master of Arts degree in Public Health. I want to welcome all of you. Thank you for joining us. So,
thank you, John.
My pleasure. My pleasure. So what we'll do is we'll speak to each of you individually about your project, and then we'll all come together. So Kgalalelo, if we could begin with you, the name of your project, the working title is Toward Greater Synergy Between International and Domestic Election Observation. Tell us what you're taking a look at.
Yeah, so basically my research is premised on the background of democratic backsliding in Africa and election observation, the role of election observation in sort of consolidating democracy in Africa. And so we look back at the 1980s and around the 1990s when most of African countries started to regularize the conduct of elections as a way of transferring political power. And then election observation sort of facilitating that, bolstering confidence in electoral processes, deterring electoral fraud and manipulation and violence. But now we see more and more that elections have become really a problem. And so I'm just trying to find the gaps of what it is that really international election observation, especially international non-governmental organizations from the US, the sort of challenges they're encountering in Africa or the shortcomings of those organizations and how they've been working with domestic election observers in Africa, because we see more and more, again, advocacy around how we should have local organizations be sort of the ones pioneering local initiatives where peace and democracy is concerned. But we cannot talk about domestic election observation without really considering the synergies or the interlinkages that they have with international non-governmental organizations that are doing election observation work in Africa. And so what I'm trying to really look at, or what I have been looking at together with policymakers and practitioners here in Washington, D.C., is how we can better, strengthen that collaboration so that we see going forward African countries consolidating democracy and really seeing political reforms that will steer countries toward democratic governance.
As you look country to country, have you identified any common threads as far as what has led to backsliding and why there are some elections that aren't happening as smoothly as they have in the past? I mean, even in this country, you see a contested election according to some, although the majority of Americans accept the results of the last election. Still, there are court cases, there's ongoing, there's the prosecution of a former president of the United States. Have you identified any root causes or any consistent reasons why things have deteriorated?
So, John, elections in their nature are really competitive and contentious. And so we see more and more like heads of states, leaders of states in Africa, trying to really cling into power. You see extension of terms in the presidential terms. We're seeing more and more of manipulation of electoral processes. So really, it's just a power thing to try and hold onto the grip of power that is really a problem of our leaders in Africa and how the elections are turning out to be, despite what they are intended to do, which is steer and facilitate countries toward forming institutions that are able to deliver for the welfare of citizens.
What does it take to make things work smoothly? You know, as you look around at best practices or countries that have a better handle on this process, what are the elements that are necessary?
The civil society that is dynamic and robust, like how I'm talking about domestic election observation as one of the tools really that can help in engendering democracy in Africa, in the sense that the domestic election observers have sort of a long-term mandate in their countries that are there for a very long time. I mean, all the time actually advocating for political reform, also just trying to work with institutions to transform the way that institutions, electoral management bodies are conducting electoral processes or administering electoral processes. Just to give an example, we have Yaga in Nigeria that recently has been very involved in Nigeria in observing as the political processes are unfolding there. And then just recently they went and they observed elections in Liberia. In their mission, they had an electoral management body staff member from Nigeria. They had media staff from Nigeria. They had also members from the judiciary. And what they're trying to do is try to sort of have also a benchmark mechanism of what other countries are doing better. So taking those people to Liberia who wouldn't normally form a part of an election observation mission is just trying to expose institutions in Nigeria to what is happening in Liberia and what lessons they can learn from the electoral processes in Liberia that they can bring into Nigeria. So if we can have more and more support for domestic civil society organizations that are involved in election observation and the exchanges and really the integration of also members of staff of institutions that are overseeing electoral processes in African countries, I think we can go further. Also, donor governments, I mean, like I said, when I started, international non-governmental organizations like Carter Center, like the National Democratic Institute, IRI in Africa have really been working with domestic election observer missions. And this collaboration that they have should be strengthened because despite advocating for domestic election observation, they sort of have a resource capacity issue that INGOs have been able to assist with, technical capacity building, and also just funding these missions. So we need to see more and more greater synergy and strength and collaboration.
And Kgalalelo, what form will your final findings take? Will this be a report? Will it include recommendations? And how do you plan to share it?
Yeah, it's there is going to be a research report, and there's going to be a policy brief that has detailed policy brief recommendations. I actually have a presentation here in Washington, D.C. on the 7th of November, that is next week, Tuesday, where I'll be disseminating the findings of this report and also just policy recommendations for policymakers and practitioners, both here in Washington, D.C. and in Africa.
So that'll be a public event? That'll be open and not a private event?
It will be a public event.
Then I can tell our viewers watching now on Wilson Center Now that if you come to the Wilson Center website and check on the programs tab and find the Africa program, you'll be able to find the presentation that Kgalalelo just talked about. Thank you. This is important work, and congratulations on being here and having an opportunity to work on it. And thanks for sharing with us the details about it today. Adane, now we're going to turn to you. the name of your project, Simmering Inter-Ethnic Tensions in Contemporary Ethiopia and its Implications to Regional Peace and Security. Tell us about what you're examining.
Thank you, John. So my project mainly focuses on the drivers and regional implications of inter-ethnic tensions in Ethiopia. So I'm trying to provide a regional perspective to the security and political developments in Ethiopia. And so far, much of the focus has been on the human rights and humanitarian aspect of the situations. But my project argues that the ongoing conflicts, which are directly related to the tensions in the country among ethnic groups, is really threatening regional peace and security in the Horn of Africa. So as we all know, the Horn of Africa is a geopolitically strategic, but also most volatile, one of the most volatile regions in the world. It's highly important for global economy, as well as it also determines what's going on in the global peace order. So that's really an issue that I want to highlight. So so far what I have managed to engage is like identifying the drivers, which are not only one or two drivers, but it has different dimensions. There are historical drivers, socio-economic drivers, as well as structural, mainly focusing on the political system. But when it comes to regional implications, I have identified 5 major ways how tensions in Ethiopia that are manifested in political and security divisions and crises would affect the region, which is the Horn of Africa. So the first one is probably, as we all know, that Ethiopia has been one of the, in the case of Horn of Africa, always we think of Ethiopia as an anchor state, where Ethiopia was involved in sending peacekeeping missions to its neighbor. It was also involved in mediating parties that are engaged in conflict in the region, as well as also it was a leading actor in fighting terrorism, which was also one of the allies in the US war on terror. So given the contribution that it has and the vacuum that it might cause in the Horn of Africa, so there is really a dire need to address what is going on in the country. And again, recent developments have also indicated that extremist groups like Al-Shabaab are also taking advantage of what is going on in Ethiopia, which is really a serious development. And the third one is involvement of neighboring states, mainly an example could be the Eritrean involvement in the Ethiopian conflict. So the other two implications that I have identified are there is also a potential for a proxy war, since there is a power competition in the Horn of Africa. So if you look at Djibouti, you'd see military bases of China, France, the US. So Russia is also trying to get military bases in Sudan and Eritrea, and Turkey is also there in Somalia. So these kind of geopolitical competitions would also threaten the potential that they could be involved in internal politics, and we could have both domestic and regional proxy wars. So the final, or the fifth one is now there are around 3 million internally displaced people in Ethiopia. They are most of them, probably 80-90% of them, are displaced because of the conflict, and the remaining are displaced due to climate change related factors, which the state is really engaged in the conflict. So these kind of issues are not really addressed. So now, if the conflict escalates in the country, there is a possibility that the regional refugee crisis would occur. So there's also a tendency that this regional, because like if you look at the neighboring countries, Sudan is in crisis. South Sudan has its own limitations, and also Eritrea is one of the places where the refugees are also originating. And probably Djibouti and Kenya might be there's a potential that they might be flooded with refugees. And especially if you look at the situation in Djibouti, then it's a small country that cannot really accommodate and hold. So there is a potential that these refugees might also continue towards Europe and the Middle East and so on. So I see that there is a lot of implications as well as risks revolving around. So I'm arguing that the international community should not really look at it because there is an understanding that the signing of the Pretoria Agreement last year, November 2022, was considered as the kind of a closing moment for the conflicts in the country. But still today, there are conflicts going on and there are really a need for urgent attention and interventions.
So your title, the word simmering, is interesting in that it speaks to almost a chronic condition, right? Where the heat just stays high, not necessarily boiling over, but not necessarily cooling off. And as we know, we look around Africa, we look around the world, and whether it's interethnic tensions or ethnic tensions, they tend to be almost ancient in their origins. And I wonder, with the youngest continent on the planet, demographically speaking, what do the trend lines indicate? Are young people inheriting these biases and these tensions and these competitions, or is that lessening over time based on a youth surge?
Unfortunately, so the overall political structure in Ethiopia has mainstreamed ethnicity as a major political currency in the country. So since 1991, the political system has already adopted ethnic politics, and the constitution allows regional, like, Ethiopia is a federal country, like where we have regions. Most of them are established based on ethnic identity. And it's also possible, because of the system, it's also possible to have political parties mainly focusing on a single ethnic group. So the overall structural arrangements really attracts almost all institutions and the people there. And there's also a tendency that the youth are also involved in kind of interethnic violence because of the recent developments. For instance, if you look at what's going on in the country currently, there are ethno-nationalist insurgent groups that are emerging every time. So most of the recruits are the youth. Mm-hmm. And there's also a risk that, like, given the complexity of the problems, and if you look at the IDP camps and so on, like, there is a lot of young population around that, being victimized or being propagated by ethno-nationalist elites that they are really under threat and so on. So there is a lot of youth mobilization, and then this kind of tensions and conflicts are mainly affecting the youth. So that's also one of the risks.
Where do you see the most signs for hope? Are there things that can be leveraged that can turn the trends to a positive place?
To be frank, yeah. The way I see it, given the urgency and the complexities, efforts that we are undergoing currently are not sufficient. They are inadequate. In that regard, I don't really see a kind of optimistic reality unless there is something going on. So we don't see as such, like, that much encouraging efforts. Of course, there are efforts by the government where national dialogue commissions are established and transitional justice efforts are going on, but still these kind of initiatives are being criticized by the opposition and international actors for being flawed and so on. So I am assuming that there is still an appetite for peace among the people, but we need to also build on that. So the available initiatives and solutions that are still on the table are inadequate, and we need to do more.
Adane, I know that generalizing can oversimplify, and that's not my goal, but I wonder if you can make some sort of a general statement about whether foreign investment, which is sort of the most positive element, versus foreign meddling, which is a negative. On balance, are foreign actors helping or hurting the situation?
As you said, like, we cannot really generalize and say that their involvement is positive or negative, but so far, much of the actors are trying to help in terms of providing humanitarian assistance, or in terms of pressuring the government to commit for cessation of hostilities and so on. But again, certain actors are also involved in appeasing the parties involved in the conflict, whereas the others are also focusing too much on sanction. So what I see lacking is a kind of positive engagement where international actors are basing their assumptions and policies on what's going on the ground and engaging the government and other parties toward this a better future. So I think there's a lot of misinformation and also a tendency to bring the situation into their own boxes where they see the world and they see the developments in Africa and so on. So we need to understand that Africa is changing and still the situation in Ethiopia also changes every time.
And same final question I asked Kgalalelo about the form that your final findings will take. What's the plan for your research?
So there's going to be a research report that's going to be published by the center, Woodrow Wilson Center. And there's going to be, again, a policy brief, which will be published and disseminated to the stakeholders. And as it was mentioned earlier, then there's going to be an event where we will be sharing our findings to the stakeholders, and discussions and question and answer sessions will be there. And the session will be a private session.
Terrific. Thank you very much. I'm going to turn our focus now to Marie-Grace's work, and her focus is Memories of Rwanda's Genocide, Psychosocial Effects, and Peacebuilding Among Young Adults. Speaking of the youth boom, Marie-Grace, tell us about your work.
Thank you, John. I am exploring the psychosocial effects of the genocide memories that are being transmitted or communicated to young people and its implications on peace building processes. The youth that I am focusing on are youth born after the genocide from perpetrator and survivor parents. I mean, people who have experienced, who went through the genocide, either as perpetrators or victims, and now who have produced children after the genocide. So I'm trying to understand how memories that are communicated from public settings, such as the genocide commemoration periods, from schools, from media, or art crafts, are changing, are affecting, are impacting the way young people think and the way people interact, and how their mindsets transformed or constructed based on such memories may have an implication on peace building processes in the future. So that is what I'm looking at.
So,
Yeah.
you know, societies that have experienced such intense trauma, that you can see two different ways that often it breaks. One is that young people become almost ahistorical and forget and put themselves potentially at risk of a repeat because they haven't learned the lessons of history, or it can bog down a society where it's hard to overcome the trauma, especially when it's so recent. What are you finding as far as young people in Rwanda? Which of those or a third track do you see emerging?
Yeah, the most popular one is a trauma crisis, which I try to describe as psychological distress, where young people show almost similar symptoms of trauma that are seen in genocide survivors.
As those who've lived through it.
Yes, yes. Yeah, but those symptoms are just developed through imagination of the past as an horrific event, and then children then start to behave as adult people, even if they were not there. There is also an issue of mistrust based on testimonies that are being given, and also communications that are shared within the family settings, even though such information, such memories from family settings are sometimes fragmented, but sometimes the families or parents share misinformation which can mislead youth, and then youth have a kind of mistrust toward their peers from other groups than their parents' groups. There is also an issue of feelings of retaliation, where young people, especially, it is from both sides, where young people for instance, genocide survivors are afraid that they can be attacked in the future by perpetrators who wanted their families, but also descendants of perpetrators are afraid of being killed, or they have feelings of revenge they against their parents, but also they are afraid of being killed by victims because their parents have wronged them in the past. Another issue is that some children have developed a kind of, I don't know whether I can call it depression, but let me say it's like hopelessness. They have feeling of feeling they have no hope for the future, because when that trauma attacks them, and then their families are poor and they can't easily overcome family challenges, such as problems that their parents are facing, or when they are not able to have means to continue their studies, then they start to lose their hope for the future. And some children are also taking care of their parents, because some parents are disabled, like most of genocide survivor parents are traumatized. Sometimes they don't work because they spend their days on the bed because they are depressed, they are acting out, they're enacting trauma, they have a trauma crisis, and then children have to stop their schooling to support them. Similar to descendants of perpetrators, some children dropped out of school to assist their parents, mostly mothers, who are there at home to work for the family, but also to feed the father who is in prison because of the genocide crimes. So most of those are coming out from my findings.
What I wonder, when we talk about a shared trauma, the reality of a shared trauma, it is what it is, right? And it's inescapable. On the other hand, when it comes to recovery from trauma, that often comes down to the individual level. And you can't recover as a group. Each person has to deal with it in his or her own way. So I wonder what kind of resources are available, and is it anything close to what's needed by the society?
Yeah, a lot of things have been done. Like the genocide commemoration, I said, the event and activities, some testimonies, some activities help young people as well as all of that generation to heal from their trauma, because sometimes through those events and activities, they may learn the truth from the past, and that truth sometimes help young people to get out of confusion, and then they can take a step ahead, they can get from their trauma. But coming back to your direct questions, that the Ministry of Health has now been promoting community-based approaches, because in Rwanda what you mostly have is not that individual trauma only, but you have a social trauma, because the neighbors kill the neighbors, families kill the family members, parents kill the children, or a wife who has been killed by her own partner or husband. So it's that kind of a social trauma is now being dealt through community-based approaches, but also at each hospital, there is a psychologist. A lot of things are being done to address that trauma, but still, also there is a huge need of other approaches to help the nation to recover, especially to help young people to overcome this secondary trauma.
There's two kinds of distance involved, right? There's distance in time-wise from the actual events, the traumatic events, but then there's distance based on your family ties, your community ties. And even though time passes, the reality is there are still people there who are directly involved and are directly affected. And so I wonder, have you given any thought to what's a realistic expectation for how long this will take?
now, I can't determine how long it will take because I'm conducting a qualitative study and it's like an informative study. I'm still exploring what is happening and how this is affecting young people. A major quantitative studies needed to measure the magnitude of the problem, but also it's very difficult to determine how long this effect may last. In the literature, it is said that this effect may last like until 3 generations, which means almost 100 years.
Yeah.
So, but that is why we need to intervene as soon as possible to break this cycle for transmission of trauma across generations, but also to prevent another cycle of violence, because most of the trauma victims are easily engaged into violent conflict as well. So yeah, that's what I can say.
Yeah, and I apologize for asking you an almost impossible question, right? That's impossible to predict. So same question I asked your colleagues, what will be the final form of your research and what do you hope to do in terms of sharing?
It's the same as Adane and the Kgalalelo. There will be a research paper which will be out soon, policy brief, but also there will be internal and external presentations that will be shared soon.
Great,
Yeah.
thank you. So, you know, we're all in separate rooms, but let's all come together now in our roundtable format. And thanks for each of you to take the moment to share with us your research and your work, all really important and exciting projects that I know you hope and we hope will have real impact. So I want to ask you about your more general experience at the Wilson Center as scholars in the Africa program and specifically in the Southern Voices Network for Peacebuilding. Has this helped your work, and will it create connections and ties that will be ongoing? Then we can go in any order. Maybe we go back to Kgalalelo, who began our discussion, and ask you that question first.
Yeah, most definitely, John. I mean, I have had the privilege to meet with practitioners from international and governmental organizations at the National Democratic Institute, at the Carter Center, at the International Republican Institute, who have years and years of experience in the field of election observation in Africa. And I have, as undertaking my studies over the years, I've been coming across their work. So it was really empowering to finally, sit and have a talk with them on the issues that election observation is encountering in Africa, the challenges, the shortcomings, and how we can sort of come up with solutions for better engagement and impact in the electoral landscape in the countries in Africa. So it's really been empowering and enriching being here in Washington, D.C.
And I'm guessing based on that, you would recommend it to a colleague who's considering applying.
Most definitely. I mean, it's an experience that I think if anyone, who is doing any work around international engagements, interventions in Africa, should really look into the opportunities like the Southern Voices Network for Peacebuilding, for enriching their work and just for growth and development, personal growth and development in the areas of work.
Great, thank you, Adane. I almost feel embarrassed that I'm fishing for compliments because I know you've had a positive experience, but it's useful for people who are out there and considering it and who want to know more about it. Share with us what the advantages have been for you to do your work in this setting.
Well, maybe I think I can say a lot about that because for me it has been a transformative experience. And probably one of the major turning point in my career, because I can think of a lot, but simply to mention some of them, the people that I met at Wilson Center itself. It's like, this is the world itself. You meet people who are well experienced in the policy circle and the academic, as well as you also meet fellows, starting from my sisters from Rwanda and Botswana, and you also meet a lot of people who got the opportunity to join the Wilson Center community, and all the events, encounters, meetings, discussions, and coffee time are really informative and also inspiring. So looking at from Wilson perspective, this is what I like. I really enjoyed each and every interaction. On the other hand, the program has also availed the opportunity to network with professors in the university and the policy circles and the people working in the development organizations and very important institutions that are based in DC. And also, again, it also gives you a privilege, of course, to reach out people outside of DC. I was also able to conduct virtual interviews, which was even impossible for me to do it from Addis, because my presence here at the Wilson Center also has created an opportunity to reach out. And at the same time, the exposure of I think 2 weeks back I had an internal presentation, and also on Friday we'll be having a session with congressional staffers. So then again, next week there's going to be a presentation to the external audience. All these kind of exposures are really, really important for a person who really thinks that his or her idea can influence the people making important decisions, influencing the Africa and other parts of the world.
Yeah, people who are academics are often accused of living in ivory towers, right? But what you're talking about is real interaction where the rubber meets the road with people who have a chance to affect policy.
True.
Have the three of you met before this experience, or was this part of the new connections you've made? So all of you made.
No. We met here, and of course now we are a family.
Marie Grace, let's hear about your experience.
Yeah, thank you, John. I really would like to express that I am happy that I joined this program, because for me it's been time and a place of exchanging experiences with fellow scholars and experts in my field. But also it was a good opportunity to network with other people from other fields, which sometimes is a source of inspirations, but also a supporting environment, because we have a big team, especially Africa program, and they are there for us whenever we need their assistance, their support in terms of what we are doing. Whenever we face challenges, the team is there to assist us, to help us go through all of the challenges that we are facing, so that we can achieve what we are looking at. Also, just to come back on networking, for instance, when I'm talking about psychosocial effect among younger generations, it's like I'm informing other countries, including Ethiopia, where Adane is from, that if they continue fighting, the trauma that is being caused by the war in Ethiopia will migrate from the generation, today's generation, to future generation. There is possibility of having repetition of violence. The same if we don't strengthen our young people, youth, we are likely to have non-democratic countries, because you can imagine how people are angry, who do not trust each other, can live together. That will be a big problem. So yeah. I'm so happy to connect with different people. And I see this as an opportunity for building up my experiences for today and in the near future.
Excellent. Thank you. And I take what you said there, Marie Grace, as both a warning and a challenge, right, as far as engaging young people. Marie Grace, Kgalalelo, And Adane, thank you very much, not only for today, but for your work with the Wilson Center. I mean, you elevate all of us, and it's been a privilege to have you here with us. And I have to say, over the years, conducting interviews with the alums and people that have come before you at the Southern Voices Network for Peacebuilding, it's always really impressive, just the quality of individuals and their work that are assembled by our Africa program. So congratulations on your work. Thank you for your time here.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John.
We hope that, and if you'd like to know more about the individuals you just heard from today and their work, or the Southern Voices Network, or the Africa program, come to wilsoncenter.org, and on the top of the screen, you'll see a programs tab where you can come to the Africa program, and this work and more is available to you there. We hope you enjoyed this edition of Wilson Center Now, and that you'll join us again soon. Until then, for all of us at the center, I'm John Molesky. Thank you for your time and interest.